It is your Tuesday daily delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a good one. Woke up to a little bit of snow this morning. Looks pretty out there, though. Hope you guys are getting around okay this morning. It's not a lot of snow, but it's jarring when we haven't had much this year. So be careful out there if it's slippery at all, but enjoy it too. 'Tis the season. We'll be getting plenty more of that, I'm sure, in the next few months. In the next few minutes, you'll be getting a lot of sports content, not snow. Randy Johnson joins me here in a little while. Talk Gopher football. It's been a busy off-season already for the Gophers. It almost feels like we have to cover college football, college sports like a pro beat now after a season ends, when you're kind of wondering about free agency and things like that, almost like the trade and the free agency market, because the name, image, likeness, the transfer portal have changed how business is done, have changed how rosters are constructed, have changed the mobility of players. So now we're hearing about, players who you would have just assumed in the past are coming back. Like, hey, they have 2 years of eligibility left. They're going to be back next year. Now they feel the need to announce that they are either coming back or entering the transfer portal. The latest to stay, good news for the Gophers, cornerback Justin Wally had a good season this year, had some key plays against Nebraska and Iowa, which probably stacked up as the two best Gophers wins of the season once they got to the end of things. He's coming back. We already knew that Darius Taylor, their excellent freshman running back, was coming back. We already knew that Daniel Jackson is coming back. We already know that Max Brosmer, the transfer quarterback from New Hampshire, is coming in. We already know that Ethan Kaliakmanis is heading to the portal. That happened officially, I would imagine, on Monday, the first day the portal was open. So lots of comings and goings in Gophers football. Bowl game decided. We know where they're going, the Quick Lane Bowl. So Randy and I will break down a lot of that and the impact of the transfer portal here in just a little bit. Got some Twins thoughts at the end of the show. Winter meetings ongoing. Bobby Nightingale Jr. will join me later this week to kind of wrap up what happened at the winter meetings, what the Twins are talking about, some trade possibilities there. But yeah, that'll be probably Thursday or Friday's show, so stick around for that later this week to talk some hot stove with the Twins in December. First, though, today, what I miss, I want to talk about some playoff possibilities, some playoff odds right now, because it strikes me that things change quickly this time of year. We kind of into the seasons with the Wolves, with the Wild, with the Vikings certainly. And just a couple weeks ago, the Vikings were looking awfully good in their playoff kind of push. They had won 6 out of 7, right? Because they were 0-3, then suddenly got to 6-4. So they had made this strong push. They were looking at a game at Denver and home against Chicago before the bye. You look at the Denver game and you're like, that one's harder than it used to be, but they could still win that one. And the Bears game certainly. So you're thinking, okay, go to the bye, no worse than 7-5 in the driver's seat for at least a wild card berth. And then, of course, they lost that game narrowly to the Broncos. Could have had it, didn't have it, and then lose to the Bears in disappointing fashion. Now their season is kind of in disarray. We're going to find out, I'm assuming, sometime this week, or certainly at least by Sunday, whether they're making a quarterback switch, probably mulling whether they're going to go with Nick Mullins. That was not a pun. That was just the word that came to my mind. Sorry about that if it appeared to be a pun. Mulling Nick Mullins. Nick Mullins. Maybe they're going to go with that direction instead of Josh Dobbs. That would be the 4th starting quarterback in 13 games, because remember, Jaron Hall also got that start in the Atlanta game before he was knocked out. Could be a little bit of not disarray is the wrong word, but a little bit of influx state of quarterbacks over the last 5 games. But Vikings went from like an 80% chance to make the playoffs a couple weeks ago. They're down to 43%, according to the New York Times. They do kind of this graphic of, hey, remaining games left. Here's kind of how it looks. If things go this way, things go that way. Vikings are still in pretty good shape if they win 3 of these last 5. But remember, they've got these 2 road games against Vegas and Cincinnati. Got to have this one Sunday because Cincinnati's been playing a little bit better. Cincinnati just won on Monday Night Football. Jake Browning, old friend, former Viking, had a pretty big showing in that one. And then after that Bengals game, they've got three against the Lions, Packers, and then Lions again, which will be huge at the end of the year. They're going to have to win at least 3 of those games now, I think, at least 3 of those 5 to make the playoffs. Left themselves with less margin for error than before, that little 2-game slide that they went on into the bye. Detroit games will be important, but those are not really going to be, I don't think, factors in the division race. I guess if they swept those games, there would be a chance, but I'm not holding my breath for that. The bigger deal to me right now is that the Packers, after starting 2-1, fell to 3-6. They went on a slide as the Vikings were gaining steam. They've now won 3 in a row, though. They're 6-6, just like the Vikings. There's 4 6-6 teams in the NFC. Now, the whoever doesn't win the NFC East out of the Eagles and the Cowboys almost certainly will get a wild card berth. Eagles are 10-2, Cowboys are 9-3, but out of those other 4 teams, there's 4 teams that are 6-6. There's a couple lurking at 5-7, but Vikings and Packers at 6-6. So two of those teams will get wild cards in this expanded 7-team playoff. You get the 4 division winners, the other certain wild card from the NFC East, and then 2 more spots up for grabs. That means to me the Packers are their most formidable foe. Packers are like 71% chance to make the playoffs now after that hot streak. They've got a really easy schedule down the stretch. The Vikings are their hardest game down the stretch. The Vikings are only 6-6. Nobody on the Packers' remaining schedule has a winning record right now. Packers have a very good chance of getting there, but the Vikings and the Packers on New Year's Eve could very well determine if one, both, perhaps neither, but probably not. One of those teams probably going to make the playoffs. Maybe both of them make it, but whoever wins that game will certainly be in the driver's seat in the playoffs. But it strikes me as interesting. I'll get back to that game, by the way, in a minute with one other interesting little nugget, but strikes me as interesting. Vikings just a 43% chance to make the playoffs right now. The Wild, after just 3 good wins, 3 wins after the coaching change early in the season, I get it. A lot expected of this team. Couple different sources I've looked at, though. I think The Athletic and HockeyViz.com, both of them have the Wild at just below 50% chance now of making the playoffs. The Wild, according to at least a couple places, have a better chance of making the playoffs right at this moment than the Vikings do. That would not have seemed possible just a week or 2 ago when the Wild were in the midst of that slide, when the Vikings were looking a lot better with their future schedule, especially with that Bears game coming up. Say we track this back to last Monday, before right when Dean Evison was fired. Wild was on a 7-game losing streak. Vikings were about to play the Bears on Monday night. You're thinking, okay, Vikings going to go to 7-5 going into the bye. Wild in a free fall. A lot has changed since then with the Vikings losing to the Bears, the Wild getting on a hot streak. So there you have it. It's just an interesting kind of how things can change quickly. And of course, there's a lot of season to play out. They will determine this on the field, not on some sort of, database, spreadsheet, things like that. Like, these are just probabilities. This is just the likelihood that these things will happen. More likely the Wild will make it now than the Vikings. Now, will you be able to watch the Vikings and Packers if you don't have a ticket? And that game, of course, is at US Bank Stadium, so if you have a ticket, you are in good shape. If you have DirecTV, however, you might be a little worried right now because DirecTV is in a contract dispute, a carriage dispute with a lot of local TV stations, including Care 11. They are not, DirecTV does not have Care 11 on its slate of games right now, on a slate of channels right now. So if you go there, there's a big error message that basically says that they're not carrying it right now because of a dispute. Now, Vikings and Packers Sunday night on NBC. Care 11 is the NBC local affiliate. It's not till New Year's Eve, so it's 26 days. Certainly could be resolved by then. A lot of these things get cleared up before then, but right now, as of right now, you would not be able to watch that game. You were not able to watch the Sunday night game this past week if you have DirecTV and live in this market and have Care 11. So, interesting thing to keep in mind is 26 days out, but you might need to think about making alternate plans for how you're going to watch that game if that dispute lingers and if you are a DirecTV subscriber.
Grand Casino would like to take a moment and salute the true football fan. The passion, the hope, the anticipation, that incomparable feeling of winning. Grand Casino would also like to take a moment to remind you that you can find all that anticipation, thrill, and winning at Grand Casino. Grand Casino, let your story begin.
Let's bring in Randy Johnson, Gopher football beat writer. I thought I was going to give him a break this week and for the foreseeable future, but Randy, it got too newsy. I'm not breaking news to you to tell you how newsy it's been, but we found out what bowl game the Gophers are going to. Maybe I'll try to let you hide your disappointment a little bit on that one, that they're going to Detroit. No shame in that, but maybe not the destination of preference for some people. They got their transfer quarterback in, Max Brosmer from New Hampshire, saying he's coming here. We found that out on Sunday. We had a couple other guys are staying. Some key guys in the program are staying. We got some national news too, so we got a lot to catch up on.
Yeah, that's been a newsy weekend for college football, and I figured it'd be somewhat, but then the local stuff has really percolated up quite a bit too.
I want to start with the quarterback just because that's going to drive a lot of the other stuff. We can talk bowl game in a bit and some of the other guys coming back and some of that national picture, the four that they got picked for the playoff. But it was around early last week when all of this kind of went into motion. This quarterback from New Hampshire said he had an offer from the U. Maybe 24 hours later, we find out Ethan Kaliakmanis is entering the transfer portal. And now here we are. He's committed. The New Hampshire quarterback has committed at least. That's not a surprise, I would think, at this point. But what do we make of where he stands? He's kind of got to be the front runner for the job going into next season, right? Based on what's left and who's coming in.
Yeah, I certainly would think so. I mean, they went out and identified this guy pretty early in the process, and they looked at his numbers, looked at his completion percentage, looked at his yards and his touchdowns, and his ability to run too. And I think you put all those together, and just the experience, a 3-year starter. It's somebody who I imagine they think can fast track his development quicker. He's going up a couple notches from FCS to the Big Ten, but I think they're hoping the coaching staff is that he's more of a plug and play guy that they can put in and not have to go through the struggles at quarterback. The transfer portal, it's changing things a lot, and you could really tell that in that Wisconsin game, it almost seemed like PJ Fleck was with his comments after the game. He was envious that how the transfer portal quarterback was doing so well for the Badgers in that game, and it's like. It might have been a situation where I got to get myself one of those, for this team.
And obviously, it probably, I'm sure they were talking to him before. He came out like a day or two after the Wisconsin game and said he's got an offer from the U. I don't know what the timeline is, but I imagine that they're at least kind of looking at him along the way this year, especially as Ethan Kaliakmanis is struggling to the degree that he did. It represents a fairly big shift though for PJ Fleck, right? I mean, they had some flirtations early on, the Vic Viramontes experiment that didn't end up working out, but by and large they've recruited high school quarterbacks and tried to develop them. And Tanner Morgan was here for a long time. They've had others though come and go, guys like Seth Green, guys early on in his tenure too. Like, he hasn't really gone this route, but like you said, Wisconsin had some success. Like, everybody in the Big Ten West, it seemed like, had one of these transfer quarterbacks. Do you think that just naturally his thinking had to change at a certain point on who might be in best to run a program from a quarterback standpoint?
Yeah, I think so. I think he realized that I got to have somebody who can do that job well next year. And they go 5-7 this year. You don't want another one of those 5-7s if you're a coach on a more and more competitive Big Ten. It's you can see how the fan base has been grumbling this year over their performance. Another year of that, could be pretty dangerous for a coach's job, even with what he's accomplished here over the years.
Yeah. So this quarterback from New Hampshire, Max Brosmer, he's coming in. He's a graduate transfer, so he could. He was available a little bit sooner than these other portal guys. The actual portal for non-graduate transfers opened on Monday. It's crazy, Randy. Like, ESPN ran it was almost like signing day. It's like who is announced they're in the portal, and that's kind of where we are, I guess. But it's just kind of interesting. And it will be interesting to see what kind of an impact he can have on this program next year. And if this kind of becomes, a route they choose more often than not, or, something they have to get more comfortable with because, like you've said before, like, I think it was you that wrote it. Like so many of those Big Ten West teams had graduate or, had some kind of transfer quarterback who, you can say what they want about the Big Ten West, but there was a few good transfer quarterbacks in the Big Ten West this year.
Yeah. Every other team had one aside from the Gophers. So, and that's, then they basically showed their worth. It's something that, I think Fleck and his staff have had to change their thinking a bit. And it's, they pride themselves on being a developmental program, but sometimes the reality hits and you got to have production.
Yeah, and developmental, for a quarterback too, that's a position where reps, where having played the position means a lot. I think you see a lot of, point guards changing position and changing schools in basketball. It's kind of the same thing. It's like someone who can run in steady, come in and steady your program. And that's definitely what they're going to be hoping for next year. Now, he will have some offensive assets coming back. We heard that Daniel Jackson, the wide receiver, intends to come back. We learned that, freshman Darius Taylor, who missed some of the season with injury, he is planning to come back. Both of them mentioning kind of their NIL collective. Just it's an interesting time for college sports that we have to kind of hear who's expecting to come back. It used to be kind of a given, right?
Yeah, sure was. You would just say, okay, that person hasn't said they're leaving, so they're staying, and now it's almost like the Gophers and the collective, they want to hammer home that they're staying because of the collective, and that to basically show that, okay, please donate to this thing. That's I would guess that's why they're having them mention the name of Nickytown athletes during their announcements on Twitter and Instagram or wherever that they're coming back. It's I think they're well aware that that's really, the NIL is a really important piece in this whole transfer puzzle now.
Now, it seems like they were kind of behind a little bit, and they, I think they were wanting to make sure they were in a good spot from a compliance standpoint, things like that, which I totally understand. You don't want to run into, some sort of issue down the road where there's some impropriety and you're getting dinged and things like that. But is there a sense that they are catching up or can catch up, or is this going to be a place where they're going to struggle just to kind of tread water in this NIL game just because of their position in the marketplace and things like that? Like, they're not a small college town where it's the only show in town.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of schools would be fighting that. I think, it seems like they have rallied. They were able to make sure that, say, a Darius Taylor, who's, highly thought of. And I would think that, you see a freshman running like that. And if you're one of the schools that, hey, we need a running back and we have money, you might say, hey, here you go, Darius. But it's free agency now in a big way. And with the NIL, I think the Gophers will always, I think they'll be judged by how they're doing in compared to their peers, as in Wisconsin and Iowa, Nebraska, things like that. Teams that they battle, they have battled annually in the West.
I don't think Nebraska would like being compared to Minnesota as a peer, but it's true. It's true. I mean, the Gophers have beaten them 5 years in a row, 6 years. I can't remember how.
5 years in a row. Yep.
So that's where that program is right now. Although Matt Rule will tell you that a good quarterback in the portal will cost you at least $1 million. I don't think the Gophers were paying that for Max Brosmer from New Hampshire, but I'm sure they had to do something to tempt him to come here. None of these guys, the quarterback at least won't be here, of course, for the bowl game, December 26th in Detroit. Randy, every time I talked to you, you talked about, well, there could be a scenario where we get to go to Vegas or get to go to Phoenix or something like that. And I know those were all plausible scenarios, but they all turn out to unfortunately be wishful thinking, right?
Yeah, it turns out that there was language in the contract with because the way the conference title games fell, if the Gophers had been a 6-win team, they probably end up in a Phoenix for the second time in 2 years. But the Guaranteed Rate Bowl has a clause in the contract where if the Big Ten doesn't give them a 6-win team, a bowl eligible, technically bowl eligible, they can choose from another conference. In this case, it was the Mountain West, and they chose UNLV. Probably had a lot to do with the fact that Gophers were there just 2 years ago.
Yeah,
and obviously the Quick Lane Bowl in Detroit was very happy to have the Gophers. This will be their third time there, and they've drawn very well comparatively. They've had the second and third highest attendances when the Gophers have been there in their short history. So yeah, their executive director Brad Michaels was, when I talked to him Friday, he wanted the Gophers there.
You win 3 Quick Lane Bowls. If you're 3-0 in the Quick Lane Bowl, do you get to hang a banner? Or what do you do at that point? If they're the winningest. No team is 2-0 in Quick Lane Bowl history so far, right? If they go 3-0, yeah, right. They're the only one, right? I'm saying no other team is 2-0. If they go 3-0, we got to do something special for that.
I think it might be up there with the Clem Haskins national championship banners when they won the NIT.
NIT banners. Yeah, there's that. One thing
Clem would call those national championships.
Yeah, he would. He did. He called them national championships. NIT is probably more impressive than winning the Quick Lane Bowl. But they're as much as we make fun of it or joke about it, there's a financial component to it, obviously, of getting to a bowl game. And then obviously they've got young players. They want to get better. They get these practices. Like there's benefit to it. Cole Kramer going to be the quarterback for it, right? As far as we know. And then
nothing is. We haven't had any access to the coaches or the players since the season ended at the end of the Wisconsin game. So, yeah, it's that's presumably the one, because if it's not him, they're down to true freshman walk-on Max Shikanjansky. Speaking of Gophers basketball, the son of Jim Shikanjansky from those Clem Haskins teams back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I don't think I'm sure any competitor would relish that challenge. I don't think it would be necessarily wise to put a true freshman walk-on out there for a bowl game. So I would imagine they're talking Cole Kramer into sticking around and playing that game, whatever he does beyond that. But yeah, you get the extra practices, you get stuff like that. There's value in it, but yeah, before we move on to some national stuff, just still such a time of transition now. What a weird year, what a time of transition this turned into.
Yeah, it's I just the Yahoo Sports had their rankings of the 41 bowl games, and not surprisingly, they had the Gophers Bowling Green as 41st. And when you have a 5-7 team in there, that's going to happen. It's not a lot of people are going to embrace this bowl as something to hang their hat on, but it is what it is. My thoughts are like, okay, how does a football team get better? You play more football.
Right.
And the practices, will they, will be measurable help? Who knows? You never know. But as long as you don't get somebody, hurt real bad or anything like that, you get better by playing more football.
Will they? You said they won't be favored by 31 points this time. I don't think, though. That was
they began as a 5.5 point favorite.
Okay.
And that might be a little bit high. I think. Basically, the Bowling Green they've been pretty good. They've won 5 of their last 6. The one they lost was on a long touchdown pass, and they lose by a point to Toledo, which was a pretty good team. That's I don't think it's a gimme by any means, especially when you consider the uncertainty on the Gophers roster right now.
Yeah, nothing is a gimme at this point. You're right, especially with some of the turnover questions, things like that. Let's talk national picture for just a minute before we get out of here. Speaking of national championships, but one thing that happened, Randy, in Alabama beating Georgia, the Gophers will remain the only three in a row national champs, right?
How about that? Yeah, 34, 35, 36 was it?
I think that's right. Yeah, I did a podcast with a journalist down in Atlanta at the start of the year, kind of talking about Georgia's hopes for a three-peat, but those ended when they lost to Alabama and didn't get into the playoff. Yeah,
that was it was kind of just watching how it played out. It's you almost feel for Georgia. They lose one game by 3 points to a team the caliber of Alabama, and you dropped 1 to 5 in the playoff rankings. But there were too many really good teams for only 4 spots. This year would have been a great time to have even an 8-team playoff, let alone the 12 that will start next year. But this one made it. Somebody was going to, at least one team, if not 2, including Georgia. Somebody was going to be on the short end of the stick, and it turns out it's Florida State that's undefeated. Which, it just shows you the power of the SEC, I guess.
Yeah, they weren't gonna do this without an SEC team. Basically, is kind of what that tells you. And when Texas is good enough, and they've got a win over Alabama, that's a marquee win. They showed up in their conference title game. You still got Michigan is obviously going to be in it. And you got the fading Pac-12, but they've got good teams out there too. So what else were you going to do? I guess, but you're right. Like, unless you were determined to have a SEC team in there and say this is just the best conference, we got to have at least one SEC team in there. Florida State's got to feel pretty bad about how this all played out.
Yeah, it's. I think that people can question if the SEC was the best this year. Most years it is. I'm not sure it was this year. And you look at both Bama and Georgia didn't exactly play a robust non-conference schedules. Obviously right. The in-conference games are very, very good opponents. But Texas, obviously, that for Bama, that was the big one. But Georgia didn't play anything near like a Texas in there.
Well, we'll see how it all shakes out. I'm looking forward to 12 teams next year. I thought at one point, like 2 or 3 years ago when they started talking about this, I'm like, man, this is going to give the Gophers a chance at some point, and maybe it will. I don't know if that's next year, but if they can get this thing turned around, it's far more likely to see a team like Minnesota in a 12-team playoff than a 4-team playoff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I look back to the 19 season.
Yeah.
If you would have used the college football playoff rankings then, and you projected a 12 team, they would not have gotten in. They'd have been a couple slots short. They ended up back in the top,
right.
After the bowl game. But so they would have been very close there. I mean, they would have been a 10-2 team going into the bowl game, and that would have been. They would have been a pretty highly ranked 10-2 team not to get in there. They've been probably just missed out by a spot or two if that would have played out that way.
Yeah, I mean, they would have been an Iowa or a Wisconsin win away at that point, which they didn't do, obviously, from certainly being in that top 12. But yeah, hard to crack a top 4. Easier to conceive of, once every 5 years or something, having the kind of team that can be in a top 12 conversation. So I think that's something to look forward to in future years if they can get this thing going around again. Like you said, though, can't string together too many 5 and 7 seasons. You don't want that to happen. No,
that is not good for a program. No. The good thing right now is that people are angry about a 5 and 7 mark. If you get a couple of those together, the anger turns into apathy, and that is the worst thing you can have.
We've seen that for decades. It's not been that way lately, but it was like that before. Well, Randy, appreciate it. This time I think I really will give you a little bit of a break, and then we'll talk again next time we do.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Good stuff from Randy. As I've talked about many times on this show, sure feels like 2024 is an important year for the Gopher football program, is an important year for PJ Fleck. They were on a decent trajectory this year. Remember, they were 5-3. We were talking about, hey, maybe they can still win the Big Ten West. Then they lost their last 4 games. They lost them in kind of disappointing to embarrassing fashion, kind of depending on how you want to look at it, depending on the game. And now they go to the Quick Lane Bowl only on the strength of their academic progress rate, things like that. So next year's a big deal for them. They got to get their footing. They got to regain some sort of momentum that they lost this year, because all of a sudden it could be momentum in the other direction. Let us finish with the cooler. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The Twins, hopeful, planning right now to have Byron Buxton in center field at the start of the 2024 season. That was, of course, the plan at various other points in history, and that did not work out so well. The last time Buxton was in a game in center field for the Twins was August of 2022. You'll remember he played a lot of DH last year before he got shut down completely right up until that very last playoff game where he pinch hit in the end and popped out. So we will see. Rocco Baldelli saying no matter which player you're talking about, you don't know anything for sure. It's December. Anyone that's rehabbing and coming back, you have a plan and then you have a different direction you can go if that plan doesn't work out exactly the way you want. This was Baldelli talking down at the winter meetings in Nashville. Bobby Nightingale Jr. down there. The news is positive so far. The little video clips that I get, they look good. He's doing well of Buxton, they say. And, Derek Falvey, hopeful too. And Baldelli again, we're going into spring training planning on, if everything continues to go well, having him out there in center field and very hopeful that the procedure he had puts him in the spot he needs to be in, but we also have to plan for everything as usual. That about sums it up. The Twins don't have a great backup plan in center field right now, so they are putting some faith, at least, in Byron Buxton and his ability to stay healthy this season, to be in center field for at least a majority of the games. I don't know if you have to even say majority of the games. If they can get, I don't even know what the number is, but if they can get a plausible number of games of production and health out of Byron Buxton in center field, that will have a huge impact on their 2024 season. But again, have to plan for all things as usual. That will do it for me today. I always plan for all things as usual. Tim Connolly expected to join me on Wednesday's show, Timberwolves president of basketball operations, so that should be a fun conversation. Timberwolves right now have the best record in the NBA, 15-4. Celtics just lost to the Pacers, I believe, so Celtics now 15-5. Wolves, best record in the NBA. So that's a good time to talk to Tim Connolly. A little victory lap of sorts for him early on, at least. A lot of season to go, but everything going well for the Wolves at this point in the season. Like I said, Bobby Nightingale Jr. should join me for a show later this week as well to talk some Twins. Until then, have a great rest of your snowy Tuesday. I'm Michael Rand, back at it again tomorrow.